good morning. We will go ahead and get started. Today is October the 17th. This is a meeting of the Oregon Institute of Technology Board of Trustees Finance and Facilities Committee, also serving as the Audit Committee. The time is now 8:06, and I will call the meeting to order. And we have roll call, please.
Trustee Byrd. Trustee Cooper.
Present.
Trustee Starr.
Present.
Trustee Vitale.
Here.
And Chair Jones.
Here.
Chair, you have a quorum.
Great, thank you. Right, so again, good morning, everyone. It's glad to see you all. We'll move on to the next item on the agenda. It's item number 2. It's a consent agenda item. The first is 2.1, approval of the minutes of the June 2nd, 2022 meeting. So let me start off by saying this: we have some new board members that are with the Finance and Facilities Committee, and so happy to have you, Trustee Goldhalpor. I'm practicing. Get better at it, a little more fluid, and some others. So I'll take a little time just to make sure everyone understands what's happening. But feel free, if you have any questions, speak up. That would be great. So for the minutes, this is a consent item, so that means we don't take a vote to approve the minutes or to approve consent items. But I do ask all of the trustees if you have any questions, any comments, anything that you see in the meeting minutes that you would like to discuss. So I'll offer that to trustees on the Finance and Facilities. Anyone have any questions about the meeting minutes? Okay, so this is an item. Again, there's no need for a vote. Since there are no questions, we can go ahead and approve this item as noted. So item 2.1, approval of the minutes for the June 2nd, 2022 meeting. Okay. So next we'll go on to item number 3. That's reports. And so we have quite a few items to discuss here, and for those of you that have been in these meetings before, that I like to keep it. I have to keep on schedule. I mean, we have a long list of items, so if I won't try to rush you, but if I do, then that's who I am as a chair of the Finance and Facilities. So we have several items to discuss in the reports. And what I'd like to do is take one of the items out of order and have Mr. Don DeSaro of the FOAC go first. So this will be item 3.1.7, FOAC update from the October meeting. And we have Don DeSaro here with us. Good morning. Can you hear me?
Good morning. Good morning.
Great. Thank you. Go ahead.
Can I begin?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. This is going to be fairly quick, and it's precursor to John Harmon's discussions in a few moments. We had the meeting on October 5th. As you indicated, we had quite a few new members as with the board. We had 7 new members come on board. We had the budget and planning representative, Lisa Dillon, is new to the group. The Senate executive representative, Yuhai Yang, is new. And then Ken Fisher is the administrative staff representative. From the faculty, we had 2 new members, Mark Newport and Rose McClure. Mark has been associated with the FOAC for quite a number of years in the past, not only as a member, but he led FOAC some years back. Rose is a new faculty member this year in natural science. We had 2 ASOIT president came in, Sasha Rubich, and I believe Billy Kimball came in from Portland metro area. So we introduced the new members to our meeting. With the new members, I went ahead and we reviewed the charter for FOIC, and then we reviewed the minutes from May 16th, I'm sorry, to make sure there wasn't anything left over in the summer. And then the minutes were approved, and John Harmon's approved the minutes, and we had a discussion then on where we were at with FOIC, and we reviewed the management report from 2021, 22, and then we began the discussion, which we had a variety of points that were brought up, particularly with the new members. We're going to continue to have these commentary coming in. Most of them were coming from the faculty, trying to understand where the budget processes began and where we were at today. We began a discussion with the 2022-2023 budget, and we began the discussion with some uncertainty with the elections coming up, not only the state, but the federal election. The federal won't be that much of an impact at this point, but we felt that there was enough uncertainty, as certainly in the state with the governor contest there, that we're going to be a little cautious as to how we approach the budget. And so we left it at that. We're not certain what the impacts. Each representative appears to have a different opinion and viewpoint as to how we should be going through our funding. So John will be talking about that in a few minutes. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to John, and he will get into the management report.
Okay, thank you very much. Any questions? All right, thank you, Don. So we will go on to the next item on the agenda, and that's item 3.1.1. And that's the, so we're going to do the quarterly finance facilities and audit update. Again, 3.1.1, and then we'll start from there and go down the list. So go ahead. Hey, John.
Vice Chair Johnson. Welcome this morning, board members and Chair Davis. So we'll go through a number of finance administrative items as Vice Chair Johnson mentioned, and try to stay on track and move right along. So the first item, when we last met as a full board with a full agenda, was really June. We had a meeting during the summer, but we didn't really have financial review. So at that point, we met in June. We didn't know where we would end up the year end. We ended up in a good spot, and so I want to share those numbers with you. And I'll go ahead and go through these elements of things, and then in your packet, overall. Let me start from here. So revenue for this year that we just finished up, you might recall we got $5.5 million in special item funding from the state. We didn't get that until we'd already adopted a budget, so that was an unplanned revenue. So that's one reason why we see the $5.1 million variance to budget and for our year end. So this is year end, and this is the board adopted budget. So, however, that was offset though by the $3.6 million shortfall as a result of our enrollment shortfall we had during the course of the year, which was again something else that was unexpected. So lots of unexpected things for the year. Overall, our revenue was about $1.2 million over what we budgeted. What really helped us out was we had a lot of savings during the course of the year. We saved about $2.1 million in combined savings on salaries between classified and unclassified and faculty. So we saved another $1 million on the other payroll expense items. That's one of those things you never really know where it's going to end up. But it includes things such as medical insurance and the other payroll items. And then overall for labor, we saved about $3.1 million. But we also had a significant amount of savings in service and supplies, and this was really across the spectrum of non-labor items. People traveled less, people bought fewer things, so this was the thing that really helped us out. Through the course of the year, we did have a couple of reclassifications. Our utilities are up because of an issue that Director Tom Dara from Facilities and I are working on with the city. We're going to install a new water meter. They installed one earlier in the year, really actually last year. Created a significant jump in our utility bill. We think there was a problem with where the meter was placed, so we're working on that. And then we had some reclassification with our debt service. It used to be up under supply and services, but we put it down under debt service. And we did have some one-time savings through a bond refinance that happened last year. So overall, we saved about 6.6 million in expenses versus where we had the budget. So before transfers, we had a $7.9 million net income for the year, which is really strong. But remember, tied up in that is the 5.5 million for the special item in applied computing and rural health initiatives that we did not spend in the current year or in the past year. And that's because, as you can imagine, those types of investments and plans take time to ramp up. And Dr. Mott, of course, is away with that for this year. So that's part of the dollars we transferred out into this next year's budget, one we're in now. And there's an additional 500,000 related to some funding for athletic travel. So overall, we ended the year at 1.9 million, which is a pretty strong margin for us. You'll see last year, prior year, we ended at 1.8. So at the end of the year, our fund balance was about 17.2 million, which is 23.9% of operating revenue for the year. And the board's policy is to have it between 5 and 15%. But if you go under 5 or over 33, then you have to bring a plan to the board as to how you get back within the realm. So we're in good shape. Any questions on that?
I have a question. Is the decline in payroll correlated to the decline in enrollment?
I wouldn't necessarily say it's correlated. We're going to do a report later today that has to do with human resource and attrition, whether it's related to bringing people on board or people are separated from university. But, you know, it's been a nationwide trend really for the last 2 years. There's been a significant amount of turnover in higher education. And there's articles just about every day in the Chronicle of Higher Education. But I wouldn't say it's correlated. It's something we're certainly working hard to address. And I would say it's really a matter of mobility. And it's a matter of competitiveness. You know, for a period of time during COVID, a lot of people didn't want to move. So when people did leave your institution, it was really hard to recruit people back. Now I think we're kind of getting out of that realm. We're finding it easier to recruit, but it takes a little while to catch back up. Anything else? This is their year-end dashboard. We do these quarterly, and actually I'm working with our finance team to consider making some revisions to this. It really hasn't been revised in format, at least in a number of years. So the upper left-hand quadrant, you'll see this is really just, this spikes. As you see, we start the year pretty much where our fund balance is, and as we go through the year, we get the tuition payments during the quarters, and we get the quarterly appropriations payments from the state. You see those big spikes. That's really the balance in that as we start spending it down. And as you'd imagine, by the end of the fiscal year, we're pretty much back down to where we started out because we spent out those dollars. So the difference in that primarily is, you know, where we have that. These are just expense and revenue burn numbers. And as you'd imagine, by the end of the year, they're burned out at 100%. And the revenue is fully collected at 100%. That's adjusted each quarter in relation to the budget. And then here's just a simplistic representation of the fact that expenses were below budget. The red dot is the budget that we were below. And then the revenue, you can see we're actually a little bit above because of that additional funding from the state for the special item. These student-related enrollment numbers have not been updated yet. They will after the first month of class. And then on the far left, you'll see our days of cash, which is one of the benchmarks that we like to measure. 71 days, or we can convert that to 10 weeks. Best practice in higher ed is somewhere between 15 and 20 weeks. But I would say it's a pretty strong number for us. Anything else? Any questions on that? Our investment report, and as I'm sure everybody in the room that has a 401k has noticed, it's pretty much nosedived here in the last bit. I was listening to the news. I mean, my investment was down about 20%. It said on average, people's 401ks are about 25% below where they were at the beginning of the year. So it's looks bad, although, you know, as always in the market, you have to invest for the long term. So we expect things will return over time. But we experienced no less of a decline in our investments. You know, we have the PUF dollars, the public university funds invested, and then we also have the quasi endowment. So probably a better representation of where we ended up for here is here. And so as we look through this, we see that the operator. So basically, I guess I need to say this number is higher than it would normally be, and that's because we have some of the fall tuition dollars and some of the unrecognized summer tuition dollars. They're actually cash, but we didn't recognize them in our other reports because under accounting you can't really. But they're cash, so you have to have them in your investment because we sweep those out every night in order to earn a little bit of interest. It's under what they used to call the LIBOR rate, the London Interbank Exchange rate, but it's got a different name now, I forget what it's called. But it allows you to earn a little bit more money on your working capital, so it doesn't just sit there. Well, this number will quickly drop back down to 17 million or so, and already has. It's just not in this report because this is the best year. But you'll see that we earn about 0.6% basis points on the short-term fund, but we lost 6.2% on the core bond fund, and then overall, public universities fund lost about 1.3%. We did outperform the market benchmarks there. As you can see, the Barclays and Bloomberg averages in both of those segments, but overall, of course, pretty small return, 1.3%. Interestingly, and this is a little confusing to me from an investment perspective, our longer-term investment, which, as you know, Dow funds are invested for the long term. They're typically invested more conservatively to preserve corpus or the initial investment. And so they're typically in lower risk investments. We actually lost funding there. Our earnings was negative at about 0.68. We did outperform the market again, but it's not a whole lot of consolation because we still did lose funding on our balance. Our balance is about 6.7 million. One of the things we brought up, and I don't think Professor DeSara brought this up, but we did bring it up at the FOAP. So when the quasi endowment was first set up back in probably 2016, or in that range, the idea was let's set it up, let's set it aside, let's let it earn interest. And I think it was probably let's also supplement through a mandatory payoff. There's a 4% mandatory payoff from this quasi endowment annually, and that goes into the general fund. But what's happened in a down market is it's depleting our balance. So essentially, we took a hit on the balance because we're not only earning negatives, but the value of the investment is dropping, but we're also having that mandatory 4% payoff. We might want to watch this as we go through the rest of the year. And maybe by January, we may want to decide if the market looks like it's drop. We may not want that payout, or we may want to use it for the next fiscal year to decide if we want to preserve this balance. It may not make a huge difference, but payout of 4% on 6 million is 240,000. So it's not small. I just think we need to think about it. It would take a board action to do that. So we may bring that for consideration in January.
So, John, you said that this is a mandatory payout?
Yeah, it was part of the investment strategy that was set up. It's not unusual in a lot of ways, and it's the idea was that in an up market, if you're earning 6%, that's what we probably were back when this was set up, and 4% payoff means you're still net at least 2% plus the market growth. So it's one of those things that we could leave it as it is and not react to the market, or we could say, well, maybe we'll save a couple $100,000 next year, but not doing the payout, and we'll see where we are in 2024. Up to the board, but I can probably provide some scenarios, and Michelle and I'll work on a couple of scenarios. So that's something I want to do.
Okay, thank you.
Chair,
Yes, go ahead.
John, just to clarify, the OIT endowment assets, those are totally separate from foundation endowment assets.
Exactly.
Yes. And do you know the source of that funding for that, or when, you said it was set up relatively recently?
Oh, well, I think it was set up in about 2016, Dr. President Nagin might know.
Yeah, that was before my time. The board chose to set aside that money for strategic investments in the future.
I think it was right, might have been one of the first actions by the board right after the dissolution of the US system. I think the idea was there was some funding, I think it was derived for some assets as part of that liquidation of the system. And so I think the board at that time thought, let's invest some of these dollars and have it in a rainy day. Because I'm not sure what we had as it was all spun off, if we got a portion of the overall, reserves that were saved by the system or how that exactly worked, right? It was probably a good idea, but I can remember when that was closer to $7 or $7.1 million. And so we can see the market performance payout has continued to dwindle.
I just wanted to make clear that the slide kind of makes it seem like our endowment is only 6.7 million, but that's not taking into account about 35-ish, I think, from the Oregon Tech Foundation.
Right. Can't remember for sure.
About 30, about 30, excuse me. Yeah, Ken will get it up to 35 real quick.
And that's why it's important to realize that this is not cash up here that's going to really be there for any period of time. This is a snapshot, so it's all about timing. So those are advance payments for tuition and things for fall and summer. And of course, we have to recognize it differently for accounting rules, but at least the cash is actually received. So from a banking perspective, it's there to be invested. Any other thoughts on our investments or earnings?
John, you may want to again clarify who manages these for the universities.
These are managed kind of by a consortium of the other schools through, do you remember the name of the investor? This USSC, I mean, they're looking after it, essentially.
I believe they work with Red Board.
Yeah. At USSC, the University Shared Services Enterprise gives us these reports and things, and then if we want to do some sort of change, we would work with them and we bring an action to the board. So this next item is really just where we work through the first 2 months of the year. So it doesn't really mean a whole lot because again, it's just the first 2 months of the year. So again, if you look, we've got tremendous ending fund balance, but really that's all advance payments. We already got 1 quarter payments from the state. We also have, all of our fall tuition, but we don't have all of our payroll expenses yet, obviously, through August. Really just getting started with that. So by the time we report in January, we'll see this drop back down, but we may get a payment in January, which will jump that back up. But if it's after the close of a month, it wouldn't be in there. But again, that's kind of just inflated because of the timing of the revenue coming in. So we don't project that out because really with 2 months, it's a wild card to try to project, but we'll project after we get a full 3 months, which of course was just ended in September, but not in time to get it in this report. But so I wouldn't put too much stock. But we'll show you because some members of the board were involved in adopting our budget back in June 2nd, I think. But a number of you weren't. So you may have some questions about how was the budget set up? What kind of considerations did you have? What did you have to work with? What were you looking at when you looked at revenue and expenses? And how did this all come together? Well, as we got through the end of fiscal year 22, we realized that it looked like this shortfall in enrollment was going to last a while. So we want to be very conservative in how we set up our budget. And you'll notice on the next page of your packet that we have all the assumptions outlined here. But primarily, we ended up with saying, okay, we worked with the state, of course, as you know, we had a very real risk of a shortfall in state money. We were going to see a 1.9 or an $800,000 reduction rather, over the prior year. We were fortunate in working with President Nagy and our friends at the HEC to help them identify area within the formula that may have not been applied consistently. And so when they adjusted that, we saw 1.2 million increase over the 800,000 decrease. So it's a net of 400,000, but at least it was not a decrease. So overall, 1.2 million more than we expected to get. And so we took that into effect. Then this is, of course, all of our allocations, including our sustaining fund for engineering and technology. So overall, our state funding, we budgeted about a 0.5% increase. And then when we looked at tuition, we said, well, even though we had a 5% increase, the board approved a 5% increase in tuition and went into fiscal year 22-23, we didn't project an increase in enrollment because we thought we wanted to be conservative. So the 39.2 million that we projected here includes the 5% increase, but it also includes a sustaining 7.8% decrease in headcount going into this next year. And then we also, a significant portion of our revenue is remitted for scholarships and meritorious types of aid. And so that is 5.3 million, roughly 5%. That was our commitment through the tuition study process last spring through the TRC. And then we also set aside $200,000 for disadvantaged and underserved students to help offset the impact of the 5% increase for them. So by the time you do that, you are reducing your overall tuition. And then the other revenue, which we've talked about before, is our medical clinics and areas that, for example, the areas with dental and remote analysis, and then also some interest earnings, and then those funds we talked about from the quasi endowment or all in 1,000. And then the special general fund is other dollars are really part of the general fund, but they call it special. Overall, budgeting 2.6 billion or 2.6% less in revenue, or about 2 million. So the initial question is, sorry.
Just want to clarify, John, for the benefit of everyone, the 1.2 million increase versus the expected 800K reduction, we have already recognized it in building the budget.
That's correct.
I just want to make sure people weren't expecting another 1.2 million.
Right. Fortunately, we were able to get that squared away before we adopted the budget. And then, so, we were a little bit, obviously when we project the revenue, you're like, okay, we got 2.6% less. How are we going to deal with that from the standpoint of funding our budget and our operations? So, most of our expenses are people costs. And so the beginning budget includes things such as the increases under the AAUP contract from the prior year coming into this year for the first full 12 months, because typically it's a 6-month increase in the year they go into effect in January. Then you get the full impact in the next year. So this is the full impact of that. Also the SEIU and probably a couple of positions that were added during the course of the year. Now, we had some discussion about this at the FOAC because it always brings up the question, what is the salary recapture? That's something this board approved several years ago before I arrived as well, that said, well, consistently, we have not had a full staff. And we're going to be penalizing ourselves if we budget all of these expenses when we know we're not going to fill all the positions. So we've continued to carry forward with a $2.5 million savings recapture, which reduces our expenses and it does help us balance the budget. But it's probably not very risky because we had significant savings this last year over that 2.5 million. We do continue to monitor that very closely. And as we are able to recruit and retain, as you'll see our numbers later on show, it's really been pretty much a wash over the last 5 years. We've hired as many as we've really lost in most of our areas. But I think it's probably a good practice to leave that in there. And so the board felt that way back in June, so we left it. And then we also had contingency reserve. We had administrative salary pool that we put together. We don't know if that will be paid out or what amount will be in the pool. Also, the faculty salary pool, we don't put that at the department level because we're not sure how much each department needs because there are changes in personnel during the course of the year. So we didn't put that in the pool. And then the classified salary pool, which actually went into, in fact, I think July, as opposed to January. And then we also have this $5 million in spending related to the Applied Computing World Health Initiatives that Provost Mott is working on with Dean Peterson and in relation to health professions, and Tom Kaiser in relation to the engineering technology aspects of it. Then we also had some special items as every year we do, and you'll notice the facilities master plan was on last year. We didn't actually get to that, but we did get to it this year. So that's one of the items we'll talk about a little bit later in our discussion today. And then we also wanted to look at an administrative staff pay equity study. We've not had one in a number of years. Administrative council, staff council is asking for that. Also, the faculty pay equity study is underway. And the business continuity disaster recovery plan, which is actually something the auditors wanted us to have. A lot of, I did this when I was in Texas, but I don't think it's mandatory, but it's really a good practice. And the auditor said, you know, what if you had some sort of major disaster, like you had an earthquake, what if you had a bad storm, what if you had a fire? How are you going to continue to make payroll? How are you going to continue to have classes? And in some ways, you could say the pandemic was a little bit of a disaster recovery, because we didn't know if we'd have classes consistently on campus. We did pretty much, but you don't know until you're faced with those kind of things. So this kind of exercise will help us understand where our weak points are, how we can plan more effectively to deal with any number of types of unplanned, catastrophic events, and not lose our records. Those things are, of course, in the cloud now, so that's not as big a risk as it used to be. You have rooms full of servers. And then also the Polytechnic cost study, which we're still discussing.
Check, I have a quick question.
I'm sorry, hold on, John. Go ahead.
So in the disaster recovery plan, have you also budgeted for technology disruptions?
Well, that's one of the things we would probably learn more about, where we needed to invest. A lot of our technology is hosted now as opposed to being physically located on the campus, but there would still be end user or thin client types of things that would be at risk. We were fortunate with a lot of the COVID dollars to upgrade a significant portion of our network infrastructure, make it more reliable and more secure. But I think we'll have a lot to learn from this assessment, which I'm assuming Dr. Fuller will be underway in the next couple of months.
You're getting close to signing your contract.
So this will be a very important planning tool for us, and I think we will forward as we get through the process.
Question, John. In the expenses, do the salary pools cover any COLAs dictated by the unions?
Yes, they do. As a matter of fact, they're, for example, AAUP and the SEIU both, we look at what are the salaries under those two separate agreements and what would the X% increase be under the contracted amount. And I think for faculty this year it's 1%. I remember SEIU was a little bit higher. And then the Polytechnic cost study, which this would be the type of study that would help us better understand our cost structures. In other institutions where I've been, it's a struggle to figure out how do you allocate these overhead costs and how do you really know what a particular college costs or a particular degree program. Because there's a lot of subjectivity in how you allocate those costs. And so, we do say that our curriculums are more expensive because we have smaller class sizes, more one-on-one learning, more experiential type training. Then we also have a significant investment in equipment and technology. So one of the things would be this might help us be able to articulate a more clear message when we have those conversations with legislators, but also help us understand how to manage our own costs a little better because we understand those cost drivers. So this is something we're talking about. We may get that done this year, but we want to be very thoughtful about it, and we want to be sure that we include the campus as we move this forward. We don't think this is a cost-cutting initiative because it wouldn't be that. It would be a learning initiative, growth initiative for us as a group to learn more about how to manage our university more effectively. And then the last part, these transfers in, again, this is the $5 million coming back in for those applied computing and rural health programs, and then the COVID relief dollars. So when you say, well, how did you balance the budget? We really balanced it with this 4.5, the COVID relief dollars, and 1.5 million permanent reserve. The 5 million really didn't balance the budget because it was going to be spent up here anyway. It just had to come back in below the line because we'd already counted it as revenue in the previous year, so you couldn't count it again. But the real question is, why do we do that? And the answer is that, we believe that our enrollment will recover. We know that our teams are working hard. We know it's a difficult market right now. We also know our peer institutions, can't mention any names, but I know one of our peer institutions, which is one of the big three, actually was seeing a 9% reduction in enrollment this coming year. Could change a little bit, but we're pretty far into the term, so it probably is about right there. A couple of the others were in the 4 to 5% range. So we're kind of in the middle of the pack on that. Two of the larger institutions have seen growth, but I think they're probably adjusting some of their criteria for admission, which helps them be able to offset what would otherwise be a loss with your freshmen. So that's where we ended up the year. Running the budget.
John, does the transfer in from the endowment fund show up in the reserves or up in the top?
It would be up here in the other revenue section, such as transfer. It's quite about.
So John, what does our enrollment need to grow to actually cover the expenses?
Well, that is a good question. It's about scalability in some ways. A number of our expenses are fixed expenses, and some are kind of step variable. If you have 200 students, you need to invest something, but if you just had 60, you really don't. We were kind of at a sweet spot back before the 7.8% reduction last year. So looking at where we are this year, and Dr. Ma will give us an update on that later today. I think we have to start thinking very carefully about how we manage, our rehires as we trip people during the course of the year. Do we want to hire those back immediately? Do we want to have delay in that? I think we'll know much more by the time we get to January, which I realize that's halfway through the year, but this is still early in the year. There's also the true up at the state in October this month. They haven't completed it yet, but this is where they look at updated 3-year moving averages for the raw data that we send in, and all the other schools send it in as well. There could be a slight uptick from that. Our teams on the budget that work with the HEC administrative staff think there may be an opportunity based on their analysis that we might see a little bit of growth from state funding, but it's just too preliminary to know. So I think we have a reason to be optimistic right now that maybe our funding is not necessarily where we put it. That could grow a little bit, but we won't know really until probably the first part of November. And then by January, we'll have a better picture. That's about the time we begin our budget planning process.
Well, because we just got lucky. We got lucky with the COVID. We got lucky. Because we could be just saying we need to pull $10 million out of reserves to cover this year. And a lot of the expenses, that's not variable. That's going to be there every year. So
we are 75% people cost.
Yeah.
You're right.
If I may add to what John said, it's a very good question. I think we should be looking at it not just in terms of headcount and enrollment. What's the type of income we get? How do we want to diversify our income? Looking at it in terms of revenue. Later today, you're going to hear proposals from Dr. Mott regarding some new graduate programs. They bring in a different kind of tuition. We get out-of-state students, it brings a different kind of tuition. So I think we just cannot think only linearly about increasing Oregon resident undergraduate enrollment, which we must do because that's our mission. We will continue to do that. But I think we should look at the funding streams very carefully and diversify our portfolio, which is what we are working on.
Yeah, so we've talked about this, and I've had discussions with John about the budget that was approved that we're into now, and the fact that we got, was it $3.5 million just in COVID relief alone. That's a one-time funding source. And so John and I talked about how are we going to make up for that, because we're not going to get that every year. So that's why we really need to focus on increasing enrollment, tuition. That's our main source of funding. And, you know, we'll talk about the impacts of HEC. That's one of the, I guess, the next topic that you'll discuss. But so John, so can you summarize like our discussion that we've had on how, you know, what kind of strategy we can put into place that will allow us to make up the gaps, and, you know, the fact that we're not going to get $3.5 million from COVID relief, you know,
Yeah, it's
next cycle.
one strategy that Vice Chair Jones and I have talked about, kind of, you know, realizing that it's never too early to start planning. You know, if the indicators are out there, you don't wait until they're lagging indicators. You want to start with the leading indicators. So some things we talk about are what can we do to impact, you know, the revenue. So, you know, that's in some ways the easy side. I mean, it's, you know, we're hoping that the October true up will reveal some more dollars. We're hoping that our final enrollment numbers are a little bit higher, but they're probably pretty much where they are. So we have to start looking at what about the expense side. But at the expense side, you know, you don't want to essentially, you know, spook the university or make, you know, knee-jerk decisions. You know, a lot of organizations will just, you know, do an X% across the board, and usually that's not the most effective way to reduce. I think there's a lot you can do in effectively managing things without having to have an across-the-board type of structure. So some of that could be being very strategic in how we hire positions when we have vacancies. So do we really need those positions now? Could they wait till next year? Could they wait till enrollment begins to return? We need to still be, I think, very cautious in how we spend in regard to our supplies and our travel, but we don't want to restrict faculty that might have a paper to present or a research project they need to, you know, present to peers or organizations or professional groups. So I think it's really about having a thoughtful approach to expense management and having regular meetings to talk about that, also with our deans and our provosts, but also in the business sectors as well. We don't really have what I call a concise plan yet, because we're still trying to wait and see how much more we can learn in the next couple of months. But when you think about it, I mean, it may be that this year is more of a break-even year. We made, you know, or cleared 1.9. Then you could essentially say, well, that 1.9 kind of offsets the need to bring additional funding in as we go through the course of the year. But I just think we have to be careful managing those expenses, and we should develop in the next few months kind of criteria of steps that we would be willing to implement as an institution if we had to take some, you know, assertive action in more proactively managing this. That's why I think, you know, the first 2 months of the year are so hard to really feel strong. By the time we go through that.
But you can only cut expenses so much. You know, sometime for any institution to be healthy, you need to increase income,
Right.
whatever streams. Not much more you can keep cutting.
And you know, I mean, for every % drop we have in enrollment, it's about $390,000 in revenue. And, you know, similarly, if we increase tuition, if enrollment is down, then that every % increase is less than it would have been. But we also are very sensitive to that. I mean, our students, you know, experienced a 5% increase this last year. Have to look at, you know, next year. Now, other institutions, I mean, even the larger institutions that got significant increases to the restructuring of the SSC formula, as much as $14 or $15 million, they still had tuition increases last year. And we really were pretty much flat, as you'll see later, in overall funding over the last 3 or 4 years, even though we were successful in getting some funding restored. We haven't seen that funding growth with the state. So our increase was more, or at least from our perspective, or from my perspective, appeared to be more of a central kind of element for our mix maybe than some of the others that got a significant increase from the state. Judgment on them, because I'm sure they have their own.
Chair Davis?
John, and can you summarize what our reserve or rainy day funds balance, what would you call it?
It's about $17 million, and it's, I kind of call it working capital, but
Yeah.
it's part of that sweep that we have. But the important thing, and I pointed this out to the FOAC, because I think a lot of times, you know, people don't understand because they're not in the mix enough to know. So I think it's important that I try to help them understand things through the FOAC. It's a great venue of shared governance where we can share information. It also helps dispel misunderstandings. And that is, you know, people might say, well, do you really need that much money? Or couldn't you invest that somewhere? And the answer is, well, sure. But the thing is that we've got to have a rainy day fund, but we also have to front fund so much of our spending, for example, if we have a capital project like the Boyd project, we might get state funding for that, but we have to fund those construction costs up front. And then once we have a certain number of invoices together, we submit those back to the state and they reimburse us. So we have to float that money. So we may be spending, 2 million, 2.5, maybe even as much as $3 million at any point in time. I know that's 17 million. And so we don't really have it until the state reimburses us. It's the same way with the capital improvement and renewal. Let's see our dollars. We get about 3 million, 3.4 million this biennium from that. But we have to do all of our repairs and things that are funded from that reserve first out of pocket and then send to the state for reimbursement. So we've always got money coming and going. So that 17 million is never really just sitting there. It's really perfect capital.
So John, have you taken a look at what happened at the university in like 2008, 2009, as far as revenue and enrollment?
That Oregon Tech?
Yeah, because, well, I mean, because either we're in or we're almost in recession. So, I mean, depends on how you define it. And I'm just curious because I would imagine we could probably learn from the past and kind of what to expect. So from the state as well as enrollment.
Yeah, and of course, Dr. Vaught and Dr. Nagy will probably talk more about enrollment. But I think, there's several things as a finance person we can surmise from what we see. It's nationwide and it's here too. And that is that the national economy has created higher paying entry level jobs. And so for a lot of folks who see tuition increasing over time at most universities, they're like, do I really want to jump into that commitment right now? Do I want to go out and earn for a couple of years at $15 an hour when it used to be maybe $7 an hour? And kind of think about what my career path is going to be. The other thing is too that the community colleges have seen a significant decline in their enrollments. One of them as much as 30%. And they're even getting some safety net funding or recommended through the HEC this year of $15 million to help them cover their combined deficits because of their significant enrollment drops. But we get a lot of transfers from schools, and so if their enrollment is down, our transfers are down. So when you combine that with the very changing and dynamic employment environment, I think those are the main reasons that we see our enrollment is dropping. Our freshman admissions are up, and our retention has improved in recent years. So I don't think it's anything the university is not doing to attract students or retain students as much as it is the external environment's changing. We're having to try to figure out how to cope with that.
Yeah, I can add to that. In 2000, until about 2014, there was a national trend of growing between 2006 and 2014 in terms of STEM programs, and Oregon Tech grew. Now, we could have grown more. So I don't want to pass judgment on how much we grew at the time. The revenue was offsetting at the time. Also, before 2014, we were part of a larger system. If we had a blip in our revenue, we had a very small portion of the state coffers when we were part of the system. So that was helpful at the time. In the last 10 years, between 2011 and 2021, there has been 60,000 fewer students in community colleges. 60,000. Half of it happened last 2 years. And then there have been 9,000 fewer Oregon resident university students in the last 10 years. So there are some big factors happening out there. And I talked to a lot of other university presidents and officers outside situation right now. If you are a very high pedigreed institution, public or private, they seem to be doing okay, a handful. But the ones just below the very top, that is a national challenge right now. That's why we should not look to balance revenue just on headcount. We should really diversify the revenue stream, including federal funds for other activities. So we are creating new opportunities. That's why we are pushing the innovation side, so we get more engaged with industry, more engaged with agencies, state and federal.
So it's just it's an overall challenge that we've talked about before, in that we know what we need to focus on to increase revenue. As far as expenses are concerned, I agree that some of these expenses are fixed. They will happen every year, and we'll try to adjust them as much as possible, but expenses are what they are. And then for these positions, the university has really experienced savings just from salary savings and not filling vacant positions. But, that's not ideal. I mean, we need people, we need faculty, we need staff to help the university operate. So we try to balance that as much as possible with the reality of the situation. And we want to continue to invest in the university. Some of these things that we're doing, like the facilities master plan and some of these other plans that we have. So it's a delicate balance that we have to continue to work on. But I think the main message is, again, this university is experiencing challenges that other universities are as well. So we've been able to sort of just make strategic decisions on how to move forward and planning every year. But I think it's important to understand that the board has adopted this balanced budget, and we will continue to manage it as best as possible. And we'll have this discussion, every time we meet every year, especially as John comes up. And I always look forward to seeing the monthly management report just to see how we're doing, just to get a pulse on the stability of the institution financially. So again, we have a good plan. We just have to continue to be focused on.
I have a question.
Sure.
If I may, John, have we ever considered offering early retirement or a monetary incentive? I know that other institutions have either done so or are considering it.
I think we've looked at that as an institution and actually implemented it a few years ago. Did consider it again last year, but as we looked at the demographics and the age structure of the university, it looked like there might be a very narrow band of people that might want to take advantage of that. So we didn't implement it because we didn't think there would be quite that much savings based on staffing.
Okay, so go ahead, John. Continue, please. You were on where are we at? 3.1.6.
Yeah, so I think everybody's probably seen this. We've talked about these budget assumptions. And then I just wanted to give, I know a number of the veteran trustees are familiar with these numbers, but I thought I would show it just to kind of refresh the memory, especially for the newer trustees. That is, as you can imagine, see, our tuition and fees makes up 51% of our operating budget. So the state only kicks in 45%. And then the others, those other dollars we talked about, the revenues and the earnings off the downer, that type of thing, and the F&A from grants. And then when we look at our budget expenses, when you really add up everything here except for services and supplies, it's all people related. So we're 75% people. So that's why when we start talking about reducing budget, it gets, it gets very challenging early on because 75% people. And when we look at our spending as to how much we spend, really the central education, if you add the instruction, that's things like DCAS or St. Peterson's areas. And then you've got the academic support from the provost office and student services with UP Foley and all that. We're about 60-some percent, 68% student focused in everything we spend. And then, you've got your physical plants, auxiliary services, and even some of those auxiliary services support students. And your institutional support, debt service and payroll and facilities, and IT and all that kind of thing. But we're 68% spending on core student needs. Then this is, you've probably seen this before. These are our core funding areas. So we get the primary sources from the Public University Support Fund. Then we have the Engineering Technology Sustaining Fund, which is about 1.2, 1.4 million a year. Then we have the Oregon Renewable Energy Center, which is $400,000 to $500,000. And then, of course, the student fees and tuition and the university funds from the investments earnings. We talked about the F&A on grants and the clinics revenue. And then the other funding that we get, which is not in the operating budget, such as the sports lottery, which helps support our athletic programs. And a portion of which I think is also retirement debt related to those activities. And then capital improvement, which we mentioned is money we never actually have in our budget, is where we get reimbursed from. And then also the bonded capital construction, which again, we draw down after we And this is really kind of a quick breakdown of where we are this year versus last year. I wouldn't be alarmed at this. This is just that one-time money coming back out. So it was never really going to be this number year after year. It would have been 32.4, well, 32 roughly without the 5.5 in there. So we're pretty much year to year, not that much of a change overall. And that's not to be unexpected. It's the second year of buying. So this is where you can see that our funding has kind of leveled off over the last 3 years or so. This was the last year of the prior biennium. And the state put another 63 million into the PUSF, which is about 95% of our funding. But as you can see, we didn't really see an increase. If anything, we were fortunate to maintain the amount of funding we had. So that 63 million went to all the other institutions in the state, basically. And again, that was because the formula weights and some of the applications changed. So the good thing is, on way, is we're stable now. The formula is not going to change again. So as funding does increase at the state to the Public University Support Fund, then we should see these numbers climb for the next biennium. That's our goal. And this is just the overall funding for the PUSF itself. As you can see, Oregon Tech receives about 7% of that total funding. But it's interesting that this has increased pretty considerably in recent years, and you see, again, ours is kind of level off. This is a quick breakdown of the funding that we requested through the consolidated funding request that's put together by a couple of the PFAs. I was fortunate enough to be included on that. And also a lot of the budget work that was done by some of our folks and folks around the state of the universities to figure out what does higher education need to ask for the next biennium. We got 900,000 current biennium that's getting ready to wrap up coming this June. So the state has historically paid about 24.3% of all expenses of the universities. So if they were going to maintain that 24.3% share, what does the new amount need to be as costs escalate for salary, payroll, health benefits, retirement benefits, and all those things? Well, it needed to be a $78 million increase just to keep us whole without seeing a reduction in spendability or support by the state, which would be an 8.67% increase. Also,
Sure, hold on, John.
Right.
John, what's interesting to me there is, so the state funding split, say, that I assume that's an average among the 7 publics of 24.3, but ours, for our institution, is 45%, is that correct? So we're just much more dependent.
The trues are probably very similar because, you know, there's difference in sports programs and difference in course offerings and difference in, you know, philanthropy and all those types of things that can help fund overall operations. But we are more reliant on it as a percentage than the blend of the 7 institutions.
Mm-hmm. And follow-up question. Maybe you'll get to it, but I'd like to know what you're hearing from the state economist in terms of projected revenues and what we're modeling in terms of stability versus, since we're a state so dependent on the income tax, if there is a recession.
Well, we had a really good, actually, the Oregon Council presidents that President Nagy is the chair of this year. I was fortunate enough to be able to attend their retreat earlier, or late in the summer, I guess it was. And both of the economists from the state were there. So, you know, let's listen with bated breath to find out what were they going to tell us. It was interesting. They're still a bit bullish on the state economy for the remainder of this fiscal year through June. They feel that the tax revenues coming in are still strong. They feel like the state has a very strong rainy day fund, and they feel like because we're not just a service-based economy, we have some real manufacturing and industrial base, that we're not going to be quite as much at risk as a number of other states that don't have quite that diversity in their economy. And I'm still new to the state, basically, so that was new for me. I didn't realize we had as much industry even a lot of technology. So this was really, it was good, but they are a little more cautious about the second half of 2020. They're concerned that by that time, inflation may have taken hold of the prices are going to continue to escalate. We may begin to see a little bit of rise in unemployment. So they're cautious about it, and we're saying, you know, the sky's falling, but they're saying, we're bullish for the next 6 to 12 months, but after that, we think things are going to slow a little bit more.
It's interesting because I suppose, are they projecting that even if we're in recession, if our employment numbers are still strong, relatively speaking, I mean, our state revenues are just so tied to employment because that's the driver of the income tax for our state. I'm assuming that's why they're still, in light of a recession, not maybe too concerned about state revenues.
I think so. You know, the other thing they did that was helpful was they, of course, have, you know, a plethora of information from prior years and patterns and, you know, how to do the stock market and all the recessions, and a lot of those curves and recoveries are similar. So they were looking at the recovery kind of bandwidth for that, and they thought it was pretty much going to be a very similar kind of recovery should we go into that phase. I think it's to be relatively short-lived, but we will pick up sooner than some of the other states across the country, again, because of our manufacturing base and our high-tech industries and that type of thing. So,
do you know when they do their actual revenue projection? I can't remember.
they were in the process of beginning to wrap them up. They hadn't published them, I don't think at that point. Is that correct, President?
I think, of course, they do the quarterly predictions. I don't know when the next one is due.
I think during the legislative session, they make their official pronouncement, which is important because that ties to the kicker.
Yeah, that may come out in December.
Maybe it is, yeah.
About the same time as the government budget.
There are two things. One is, of course, without good state revenue projection, there is guarantee of abysmal state investment. So that's good that they are projecting in a bullish manner. The challenge is, what will the state do with that revenue? Is yet to be determined given the big change that's happening legislatively. State.
And I think we'll still have some federal funds coming in over the next year with the Inflation Reduction Act. A lot of the ARPA money is just flowing through. So I think that will match some of this.
So one of the other things, we're an ambitious group, of the higher ed institutions, and we're like, why would the state just want to fund the status quo, or what they call CSL, current spending levels? Why would they want to invest in higher education? We know that we're funded 45th in the nation in higher ed, relatively speaking, and our institutions are actually at 35th. So our performance is better than our funding, so that's good. But so we said, why not have a kicker, basically, or a public policy option that would increase it. So we were asking for another 50 million that we could begin to invest in things such as equity programs, but also things that are going to improve retention and student success. So it was a broad package of things that we worked together as institutions to put together to say, if the legislature comes to us and says, why are you asking for this additional amount of money? We'll be able to provide that insight. The HEC, though, on the other hand, who recommended the governor for her budget, only recommended a 7.9% increase as opposed to the 8.6%. And part of the reason is because they projected there would be another 200 million in revenue to the universities, probably from increased enrollment and from tuition increases and things. So they offset it by this. Whereas we were saying, look, if we can get funding from the state that increase beyond our current spending levels, we'll try to keep our tuition at 3% or less for the increase. So this will probably necessitate 5% for a number of institutions. And then rather than the 50 million increase, they only projected or asked for a $21 million increase. Overall, as opposed to $1.028 billion, they're requesting $990 million, which is only $92 million more last time. So that is not an ambitious funding for education, and at a time when we really need some more support from the state. So we'll see how, of course, Mr. Davis does this better than I do, but I haven't been in the legislature, but the sitting government will introduce her budget in December, and we understand that will kind of go by the wayside of the new government. Budget by the 1st of February, and that's when all the excitement begins with the legislature, and that's where everything will start. So who knows, where we'll end up with that recommendation. So we've already had this part. So now, so the next item, if the chair Jones is okay.
Please.
Just to talk about the single audit. So people may say, what's the difference in the single audit and the fiscal year and financial audit? Well, the single audit was part of the OMB 133, the old reference, under the federal government that said, look, if you're a state, or if you're an institution that receives federal money, we want to know how you're using that federal money. And we want to know you've got safeguards and internal control in your organization that are going to ensure with reasonableness that you're spending those dollars the way you should with responsible approach. So each institution like us then is under that requirement. So we engage with CLA to do the single audit act for us. Now, this is not the same as the financial statement audit. So you'll see they said there's no issues because they actually did the audit. So they know that. But they're looking more at the compliance elements. And so there were four things. All these things are important, but not all of them are risk-based, but they're things that we can fix pretty quickly. And I think the first two, maybe a number of those have actually already been corrected. So one of those mainly around timely reporting. So there were a few instances in the samples they looked at where the reporting for Pell disbursements, the common origination disbursement system, which is an online system, were not within the time frame that are of 15 days. But it wasn't a disproportionate number, it was just a few, but they still have to report it. The same kind of thing really on the enrollment reporting. With the they call it a significant deficiency, but it's non-material, so that's good. So it basically had to do with ensuring that that's common. So, with stacking fluctuations, sometimes things can be a day or two. With the more in the area, more in the area where procurement and contracting, we need to make sure that folks are not on the debarment list for the federal government, because if you're on the debarment list, you can't participate in programs that are funded by the Fed. So if we have federal money and we want to contract with an entity that has been on the federal debarment list, then we can't contract with them. So I think there were a couple of instances where they did not find evidence that that was done. Pretty sure it was done because we have a very good purchase and procurement department, but they couldn't find the evidence. And then the other thing is that we have to make sure we follow our guidelines. Anything over $10,000 has to go through an RFP process, and then there are other requirements if it's more than that. And I think that was another situation where it wasn't clear evidence they had that. We've always followed that. Again, very low numbers, like 2 or 3, of a very large sample. So, but still, things we can improve on. We're always about continuous improvement and making sure that we're in compliance with all federal and state guidelines. Our student financial aid programs or grant activities that we have, so we'll be sure we're so. Questions? So we're addressing these issues. Oh, so I think it's time for on there, our director of facilities, who will give us a quick, thorough update on our capital projects.
So this is 3.1.9. We'll be following on the agenda. Q1 capital projects report.
Good morning, Vince.
Good morning, Tom. How are you?
Good.
Great.
So again, this is the capital projects update. I'll go through this fairly quickly. If there's any questions, feel free to interrupt. Next slide, please. I'll be going through projects that are currently underway, upcoming project and completed projects, and then touch real briefly on CIR projects. Next slide. The first project is the Boyden Hall renovation. Keep in mind that the numbers that are reflected are end of October. So the projects are a little further along than what is shown here. These are the most recent updates that I had when I put this together. So the project is currently about 40% complete. It's on schedule and in budget. Currently, it's scheduled to be 100% complete by June of 23. The next two slides are just some pictures of progress on site. So this is the exterior. And next slide. This, one of the interesting features of this building is the building had a basement that had been underutilized, never completely finished out, mainly storage. Athletics used it a little bit. Now the basement is going to be fully integrated into the use of the building. You can see that the new elevator shaft in the CMU masonry, and then the stairway coming down into the basement. The basement is going to be mainly used by IT. So the IT service desk will be located down below in all the IT offices. Next slide. The next project is the track stadium renovation. This has been an ongoing project. The track portion was completed in November of 22, and we are currently underway with the stadium renovation and the seeding and irrigation of the field. The project is 51% complete and is scheduled to be 100% complete by December of 22. Next slide. You can see here they're painting the structural steel of the canopy over the seating. The colors will match the exterior renovation that we completed on athletics. So that's coming along nicely. In the building itself, they've completed rough-in plumbing, rough-in electrical, and progress is moving along nicely. This will include fully renovated restrooms, which were very much needed. Next slide. This shows the new grading, irrigation, and seeding of the field. The irrigation is 100% complete. The seeding will be completed today and tomorrow. There is areas that the grass has already started to grow. And then the contractor just has some minor stuff to finish up in the next 2 weeks. Next slide. The third project is on the OMIC, at OMIC, the Scappoose campus. This is the new Additive Innovation Center. It's scheduled to be completed later this fall. It's currently at 62% complete and is in budget and on schedule. Next slide. This is the exterior of the new building. It has a large, I'll call it a shop area, which is the taller portion, and then the front is office, restrooms, support areas for the shop. Next slide. These are a few interior pictures. Again, on the left is the shop area, and on the right is the support area.
Tom, if I may.
I think the president and I were going to say the same thing, which is tentatively our plan is to host our January board meeting at OMIC, and I'm sure Tom will make sure the building is totally finished by December, so we can get it there and see it fully completed and have an in-person tour.
Yes,
Thank you. I was going to say we'll have an opportunity to see it. In addition, the shop area, which is a good highway is referring to, is the R&D area for the Additive Center. It's going to have some very unique state-of-the-art machines in metals, additive manufacturing.
Go ahead, Tom.
Next slide, please.
And
So
we have
this is,
Michelle Vitale, if you have anything to add.
Yeah.
You know all elements.
No, just that those pictures are out of date already.
this is the new project. So this is the new student housing project. The numbers are currently placeholders. So the budget for the project is $35 million. And I will be as we get contracts in place, I'll be updating, the design portion and construction and other, as we get those contracts in place. We will be interviewing architect firms, the three finalists on the 24th and 25th of this month. And so we should have an architect in place by the end of the month and start the visioning design process once we have an architect on board.
And Tom, can you remind us where on campus that's going to be?
The final decision will be determined as part of the visioning. So there will be a group of Oregon Tech, a group from Oregon Tech that'll work with the architect on selecting the final location.
Go ahead.
Maybe I could ask the president. So how do you see the new student housing fitting in with our goals around enrollment and attracting students?
Part of it is making sure, and I will ask Vice President Foley to weigh in on this. I think that we have to pay attention to proximity to the other conveniences. One of the things that students talk about is the ability to navigate what they have to get done on campus outside of the classrooms.
Mm.
So where we locate is going to be important, and our new freshman cohort is still growing, which is good for Oregon Tech. And I think new residence hall is going to be a very attractive element for that one. Dr. Foley, you want to add anything to this?
I would just add that, it's not going to be a net gain number of bed spaces, so we have to retain some utilization of the current residence hall in order to increase capacity and meet hopefully the increased enrollment that we're looking for. So have to retain use of the current, which necessarily be a bad thing, but we'll see.
Dr. Martin, go ahead.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think when I have seen it happen, new residence halls are an attractive element for new students. That's going to be very attractive region. And I think they are doing magic, having students come to the current residence hall, which I believe Chair Jones. Very familiar.
A long time ago, yeah. So I think, this discussion for the new trustees this is part of the investment strategy that the university had in that, these facilities, it's so important to keep up these facilities on campus to, number one, attract students. And number two, just, that's our responsibility to make sure the campus is in the best possible condition that it can be. So when we discuss the new student housing, we recognize that the current student housing that we have is old. It needs to be renovated. And we also need to look at expanding student housing to be able to, house new students, that would be coming on campus. So again, it was part of our strategy and just, making strategic decisions on our investments. As far as the location of the new student housing building, as Tom mentioned, that we have a couple of ideas. They have a couple of ideas, locations on campus that we're looking at, and that will be part of the study, part of the analysis that John or Tom and his team will embark on.
Tom referred to a group on campus. That's really part of the shared governance process. John Harmon runs through the Facilities Planning Council. In this case, do you have a special group also for the residence hall?
We're going to expand the Facilities Planning Commission to include additional students. There are two on there now, but they're the student government students. So we want to be sure we have a broader spectrum of students. We're going to have more, have some additional staff and faculty. So basically, it's supplement to the Facilities Planning Commission.
Also, for the benefit of the new trustees, we were fortunate to get 55 million in state bonding capacity, but between the increasing costs and the ability to have cash flow management, John and his team looked into it carefully and they recommended scaling it back, and the board modified. Well, how much of the 55 we will accept, and it was 35. So that's where Foley is right in terms of the number of beds and kind of accommodations we wanted to design. Those things have to be notified. Funding rest of the state.
Are there plans to have, is there student housing here on this campus? Are there plans to have any?
No, right now we do not. We also have fewer freshmen in this campus. We have only 8 students or so in that range. So as we, you can see this plant is not utilized as well during the day. So creating better awareness in Wilsonville. I'm going to talk briefly about how we are going to help Portland Metro. That's part of the strategy here. So if there is sufficient interest, I know staff also have issues here. Faculty and staff have challenges with housing too. So as we look at an international strategy, as we look at more recognized school students, then we need to rethink the housing. We have talked about it before 3-4 years ago, but this pandemic has kind of made us apply brakes. And then we need to go back and think about it again.
That could be part of an overall strategy. I was just thinking, because just reading, I think, a couple of days ago about PSU, they have a problem just with all the issues and affecting downtown Portland. So I think, when we talk about state students going to state university, the closest university here, state university, is having issues because of location. Mm-hmm. There could be some opportunities here. Mm-hmm.
Creating more awareness within Wilsonville itself is the first step. We have been speaking with the council and the commissioners and trying to create more awareness.
Please continue, Tom.
Next slide, please. So the next couple projects are completed projects. So the seat building is now 100% complete. You'll see a balance remaining. And I'm working with Oregon Tech to utilize those remaining funds to complement the completed building. And so but construction is 100% complete and the building is being fully utilized by Oregon Tech. Next slide. This project has been quite a...
Hold on. All right, hold on a second, Tom.
Yes.
Sorry to hold you up again, but Tom wanted to commend you because I think this seat project came in the midst of increasing construction costs, a very difficult time to build anything. As I'm looking at the original budget and our cost to date, we stuck on the original budget. We came in 1% under, and we have a balance remaining. So if I'm reviewing it right, well done.
You are correct. If you can go back a slide. This entire project from start to finish was completed under the COVID challenges. And so it was a very challenging project. It was completed in budget and relatively on time. We slipped about 2 months due to manufacturing delays, mainly in mechanical equipment. But considering the challenges, the project went very well.
Chair Davis beat me to it. I was going to mention it at the end of your presentation. So that is a big feather in Tom's cap. I think he did a great job shepherding the construction.
Thank you.
Next slide, please. So the Well 5 rehabilitation has been another challenging project. Well 5 is our main geothermal heating well for the entire campus. And we have finally completed the rehabilitation. The well is back online and ready to heat the campus in the coming weeks. And so it's good that this project is finally behind us. And I appreciate everybody's patience as we work through the challenges with this project. Next slide. So this again is another project at OMIC. This was a retrofit of the original building that Oregon Tech purchased to start the OMIC campus in Scappoose. This project was completed on time. It went a little bit over budget, but fairly in line. And so again, this project is 100% complete. And if you're at Scappoose for the next board meeting, I'm sure you'll get to see the improvements made there. And one more slide. This is the current CIR funding that Oregon Tech has available. So we started the biennium with roughly $3,550,000. You can see the projects that are currently listed and the status, they're either completed, pending, or underway. The projects in red are projects that the funds were set aside for the Portland Metro campus. And so I work with them to track these projects and keep this spreadsheet up to date. Again, this is a biennium, so these funds are for all of 22 and 23. And that's the end of the report. So if there's any questions, I'll do my best to answer them.
Thank you, Tom. Are there any questions? So part of what we do in our CIP program is look at, what we need on campus and what kind of, projects or work that we need for this building as well. So we try to look at both campuses. And, for the new projects like the SEAT building and the new student housing and some of these other projects that we have planned in the future that we'll talk about, we look at our debt management. Dr. Nagy talked about considering the new housing project and going after a $55 million bond, which, we could have gotten, but when we took a really good hard look at what kind of debt management, we were willing to take on, we decided that, we would go for a scaled down version of the project and accept the $35 million bond. Again, that's taken into consideration how much debt the university wanted to manage. I think what we'll do, especially because we have new trustees, is we might have that discussion again to talk about our debt management and how much bond debt we will need to take on, and because that's all payments, those are all payments that we have to pay back, and again, it's just managing our debt. So that's probably a discussion that we should have in the future, John, especially for the new trustee.
Yeah.
Okay, are there any other questions for Tom? All right, Tom, that's it. Thank you so much. We appreciate you. Okay.
And while we're getting set up here, I'll just mention, Vice Chair Jones mentioned the debt, and we're really good in debt as a percentage of overall spend. That's how you measure is what your debt burden is, a percentage of overall expenses for the year. We're at about 4%, which is really good. It will go up a little bit as we add the debt retirement for the student housing, which the first year will only pay interest. I think it's about 1.7 million, but the second year we'll start with retiring principal, which will be about 2.3 million. It could kick in as soon as the end of this upcoming summer, depending on when it's issued, but it will probably not kick in until fiscal year 23-24 because of it may actually be issued in October, depending on when the budget goes through. So.
And on that point, with housing, that's a fee for service item. So assuming we can keep existing housing operational, is that an item that pays for itself?
Yes, all of our auxiliary operations are intended to pay for themselves, and Dr. Foley has managed that really well over the years. They don't have a huge reserve, but that's kind of by design. You want to just charge the students what it costs to keep the operation going, pay your debt service, pay your support staff. And so, but we did find out in looking at this analysis back last spring that we are substantially less than our peer true universities in the southern part of the state. And so we did we did look at what we will have to do with housing, charges in relation to responding to the debt retirement. But on the other hand, of course, it'll be an nice new facility. I mean, the current facility doesn't have air conditioning. So
Yeah.
this will be quite a step up in the ergonomic design and work, people flows, and the space will be much, I think, more attractive. So it'll be worth paying a little bit more for that. So we're really probably 3 years behind as far as what we were charging. That's good for the students though, because it helps. That's why we've been probably running at 98% occupancy. Oh, 6.
Okay, so yeah, we're at 3.1.10. That's the Title IX audit and fiscal year 2022-23 risk assessment. So we have, do we have Kermit Stokes with us?
I'm here. Can you guys hear me? Yes. Do you guys hear me?
Hear you. Can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead, please.
All
How
right.
are you?
Great. I'm good. So I know there's some new folks. So for those that I haven't met previously, my name is Trevor Campbell. I'm a partner at Kermit Stokes, and we are the internal audit for Oregon Tech, and I think we're going on our 7th year of working together with the university in that capacity. Let's go to the next slide. So today I'm going to walk you through. We're kind of at the crossover moment from last year to this year, so we'll talk about a couple of the projects from last year that we finished up because we haven't presented since the start of the new fiscal year to this group, and then I'll present kind of our risk assessment and our proposed audit plan for this coming year as well. Next slide. So we finished up. We partially presented on this one back in, I think, May. When we presented, we were closing in on finishing this up. It just wasn't quite done. You should have the completed audit in your board packets for this time. So you have all of the details. Nothing really changed in terms of the final outcomes from the last time, but now management completed their sort of action plans for all of the audit issues that came up. So those are included in what you now have as the final report. Altogether, there were 6 total issues that had been identified. And then we, like I said, we kind of covered what those types of issues were previously. And I think it was a good audit. This focused on large capital projects. So coming off of Tom's presentation there, those were some of the projects that we looked at as part of this, which was the large capital projects for the university, things like how the process for procurement on those and other issues surrounding those types of projects. Let's go on to the next one. The other project that we wrapped up since the last time we presented is the Title IX audit. And so that audit also went really well, I think. It took a while to get through just due to lots of different things, including resource capacity at the university and trying to make sure that we got everything we needed to do a good audit. So that one ended with 14 total issues. For those who maybe haven't read our audit reports as frequently, I'll kind of give a high level. It's on I think the first or second page of every audit report, so you can look at it there. But basically, we break our issues into 3 different categories: findings, observations, and PIRs. Findings are what we kind of consider the most significant or serious. They can be a variety of different things, of course, but those are the issues that we would highlight the most, and that we generally say these are issues that need very, if not immediate, but very soon, something needs to be addressed. Those could be a violation of a policy or a state statute or a clear disregard for some rule that's in place to protect the university. Observations are just a lesser version. So they're more of a minor deviation at times. It might be we test 50 things and we find one mistake that was made, and it's not a clear disregard of a policy. It was a misunderstanding or something did get missed, but it's not indicative of the whole process. It's more of an outlier. Still needs attention, but not as serious as a finding. And then PIRs, that's our parlance for process improvement recommendation. Those are areas where, as we're doing an audit, we identify that things could be done better, or we have ideas or best practices or benchmarks to consider. They don't necessarily have to be implemented, but we give them as recommendations for possible improvement. So that's kind of the breakdown of the types of issues. Like I said, there was 14 total, kind of spread pretty evenly between those. We looked at, this is a very compliance-based audit, looking at policies, procedures, very clear things that are in place at the state level and federal level to dictate what has to be done in the area of Title IX. And you have the full details on that report as well. Any present questions on those before I move on to the audit program, risk assessment, kind of shift towards looking towards the future? Okay, great. Let's move on to this. So following the start of the new fiscal year, we started in on a new risk assessment. This is an annual practice that is required by the Institute of Internal Auditors to do some version of an annual risk assessment. This year, we basically start with a good template, obviously, from the last year of what kind of the holistic risks to the university are and the challenges that are being faced, many of which you have talked about already this morning or are talking about as well. And we kind of try to capture not just things, we look at the risk assessment as a university-wide. It's not just an audit identification tool. It's hopefully a tool that the entire board can use in terms of looking at what kind of challenges the university is facing. And then we do use that then to hone in on where we can be of best assistance as internal audit in helping to meet those risks and challenges. So this year we conducted 13 interviews. We were on campus for a good portion of those. We spoke with members of the administration, of university management, the board, and then also the CLA, your external auditors, and tried to sort of gather what the different issues that are facing the university were from those. We then take all of that information that we get from those interviews, including our own experience of working with the university, and we kind of break those down into unique risks. We plotted those risks on what we call a heat map that kind of shows visually kind of where the top risks to the university are. We'll look at that heat map in a second, and I'll kind of explain that a little bit. And then out of that, we propose an audit plan for this year. This year, we're recommending 2 audits. One is a sort of high-level policy and procedure review across the university. And then the other is a procurement and contracting of goods and services. Like I said, the capital project audit was sort of large project procurement. And so we'd like to continue on and sort of now cover the sort of smaller procurement, the goods and services outside of those major capital projects, and do a kind of complete review of procurement over last year and this year. The policy and procedure review, that is a project that we've kind of been chipping away at over the last 7 years. Since the university has been under its own, having an independent board and its own sort of oversight, there's been a long-standing goal to sort of get all of the policies and procedures updated. In some cases, there's still reference to old OUS standards that maybe weren't designed for the best benefit of Oregon Tech. They were designed more for, say, the larger universities, the U of O's and the OSU's. And so we've been chipping away at that. and we thought this year maybe would be a good year that we kind of just take a bigger grab at all of those. And so we're going to kind of work through all the departments of the university together with university management and start doing sort of an assessment of policies and procedures in general. The goal of this will be to find the gaps that are existing or the spaces where things need to be updated, language is old, or legacy language that needs to be changed in some way, so that moving forward, we've identified where things need to be fixed, and then the university and departments can use resources as they come available to start addressing those. So this is going to be almost like a mapping of where to focus attention to fix, to bring policies and procedures up to date that are maybe just behind at this point. So those are our two projects that we're recommending. Let's go to the next slide and look at the heat map. So this is the heat map for this year, and if you look at the big document that you have, the full risk assessment in your board packets, the numbers all correlate to an identified risk. And the way to read this map, you'll see on the horizontal, we've got the impact, and on the vertical, we've got the likelihood. And so, those are, when we look at the risks, it's not just financial risk, of course, there's reputational risk, there's safety risk, there's compliance risk, and we try to think about all of those things, as do you. And so when we look at something, I'll give you an example of something that maybe would be a high impact, but a low likelihood. Imagine some kind of, imagine like an earthquake in a place like the Klamath campus, for instance, where there's a lot of geological activity, right? And so that could have, a major impact, but the likelihood it would happen would be low. And so that would be very far to the right, but maybe lower on the vertical. So that's how we plot those types of activities or risks. And then the size of the circle is what we call velocity. And so the bigger the dot, the faster the velocity. So that's where an identified risk maybe takes place slowly over time or immediate. So again, if it was a case of an earthquake or something, it would probably be a large dot, because that would be something that would happen in a moment. You would have no time to plan or prepare for it. You would have literally seconds or minutes, whereas other risks maybe you can identify, but they're going to be slower to onset. So you could have, some lead time of a year or more to try to get to address those. So that's just sort of a way of reading this heat map. You'll notice that there's nothing down in the left-hand side in the green area. That's not because there isn't anything, it's just because we've focused our attention on what we would consider some of the higher risks to the university. So there's many things that would land in the low impact, low likelihood. We just haven't plotted those because they're not necessarily useful for this practice of identifying where to focus university attention and resources. So it's not to say that everything the university faces is high risk. It's just that we haven't plotted low risk items. Let's go on to the next. Before I move on to this, does anybody have any questions or anything about the risk assessment or the proposed audit plan for this upcoming year? Okay, great. So the last slide I have here is we also monitor the fraud, waste, and abuse ethics hotline for the university. For those of you who were here last year, you'll recall that most of last year we had what seemed very odd, which was no hotline activity whatsoever. And that was true up until about 1 or 2 days before the end of the fiscal year. And then we got 4 different issues that were reported. And then we've had 3 in the start of this fiscal year as well. So it seems that the sort of lack of activity through most of last year was sort of just an outlier and probably a timing just thing. In general, we expect, like you can see kind of historically, 7 to 9 things. Something to be aware of is from an internal audit standpoint, having activity on your fraud, waste, and abuse line is not a bad thing. In fact, it's a good thing. Having no activity typically would indicate that there's a lack of understanding or trust in the process of the fraud, waste, and abuse line, and that's not a good thing. So we like to see some activity. Even if that activity is often minor issues or maybe not even what would be truly considered fraud, waste, and abuse, we like to see activity being reported, even if it's insignificant, because if people are willing to report on small things like somebody took my parking space today, then they certainly are going to report on the large things. And so a healthy amount of activity, like we've seen historically, is a good thing in this. So since the last time we presented, there's been 7 new cases. Of those, all of them have been investigated. 1 is still being looked at. 6 of them have been looked at and have been closed. And so there's 1 that's still open and continuing to be evaluated. As far as the reporting for this goes, we monitor the hotline and we communicate with the people that have reported. Once we get most of the time they're anonymous, and so there's an anonymous way that we let them know that their issues being seen, that we're looking into it. We then facilitate giving that to the university to look at internally. Occasionally we will help. As you can see, in 2020, there was an issue that came to us from the Oregon State Audits Division. We ended up doing some work on that because they wanted some independent verification that the issue had been managed. And so, but typically we farm it through Dave Groff, the legal counsel, and then he finds the appropriate person to investigate it. Once they've done their investigation, he communicates with us. Here's the outcome of the investigation, and then we close the case on the hotline and let the whoever submitted it know that it's been looked into and is being closed. So that's the ethics hotline for now, and I think that leaves with just any remaining questions anybody has about anything.
Thank you, Trevor. So I think with the fraud, waste, and abuse hotline, Trevor pointed out that it seems like over the last couple of years it's been underutilized, and he gave an example as to maybe why it wasn't. But the other thing that we've talked about is we have to make sure that people are aware that there is a fraud, waste, and abuse hotline. So what the university does is, I think it's every year, correct me if I'm wrong, Trevor, but every year the university sends out sort of a blast email just advertising and letting everyone know that there is this hotline that's available, how to access it, and what it's for. Just again, to remind people that it's there and it's available. Is that right, Trevor?
That's right, and I think it's actually twice a year. That started about 3 years ago. CLA, as part of the external audit, recommended more sort of visibility for the hotline as well. And so coming out of that, I think it's twice a year now that a notification gets sent out to students, staff, faculty, management, everybody kind of involved with the university of where that is. And then the other thing is that the university and along with us have worked to try to make it accessible. The goal is on the website that it's not more than 1 or 2 clicks away, and that it's easy to find on the website, and that the information on the website is always kept up to date. The links aren't dead, where they can't, if they click on it, it doesn't take them anywhere. So we review that every year as well to make sure that everything is functionally operating. We submit kind of test cases as if we were somebody independent, just to make sure that there's no dead, that everything always works. So that's part of the annual process, just to make sure the hotline is functioning and people know about it.
Here, Davis.
I have a question, I guess for the administration, which is with respect to the risk audit. What's the action item from that? What do we do with the risk audit? How do we process that? and implement its recommendations.
So Trevor and his team, they do the interview. He can probably talk about the process.
Sure.
They interview members of the board, the administration, and then they come up with a very detailed write-up. And then it is more a collaborative process to determine what we want to focus on. Trevor, you want to add anything to it? John?
Yeah.
Yeah, so to start the first year that we were involved, we started the risk assessment. We did I think it was almost a 60-person survey. I think we had more than over 100 questions, and we sent it out to 60 different people across the campus, which, as you can imagine, certainly covers every department, maybe multiple times. And then we did a bunch of interviews coming out of that, and that was sort of the ground floor, foundation. And then from there, every year we update it annually with now more focused interviews with specific people. And then in terms of the action item, I think what we do is we take all of that information. Management, usually working with John Harmon in his department, they review it to begin with. I then send it out to Trustee Jones, Dr. Nagy, Dave Groff. They get a chance to review it as well and give any feedback or potential changes. Together, we all kind of collaborate to identify where are our resources best used for this year as the internal audit function, and then we propose it here to the board. I consider it a draft up until kind of this committee has a chance to review it and give us the thumbs up. And then coming out of this, unless there's any recommendations for changes or anything, we will finalize that and start moving forward with those audit projects that we've identified for the year.
I would just add that Trevor and his team are always very collaborative to work with. So there's no reason why we have to stop at just what their resources will allow for a formal review. We can talk with Trevor and his team about the ranking, risk profile and the heat map, and find out more about some of the other items that are say in the top 5. It doesn't mean we can't begin to think about it as an administrative team to reduce risks in advance of work his team. But his team will provide very good feedback and action steps, and the management will outline a plan for how we'll respond to those. But I think that's what you're asking.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's right. And sometimes, like I said, the risk assessment is more than just an audit identification tool. So there's sometimes that there might be risks on there that really aren't auditable. They might just be information that, if we hear the same kind of concern from, let's just say, for example, there's a concern of understaffing or something like that. And if we heard that concern interview after interview after interview, as an internal audit, maybe there's something that we could do in terms of auditing, staffing components, but maybe there isn't. But we still present that because we want that to be, we want to communicate the concerns we're hearing to you, to the board, so that you can think about that and say, hey, what are we doing about this? Is there anything we should be doing? Are we moving in the right direction? So, and then the other thing is, we don't always choose just the number 1, number 2 risks as the proposed audits, because a lot of times there's also timing that if that needs to go into place. If we might identify an area as being a high risk, part of that could be because it is understaffed, or maybe there isn't, maybe there's a turnover in the leadership of there, and there's new hiring that's taking place, and so there's sort of a gap there at the moment. That'd be, in some cases, a really hard time to come in and audit that. So we might wait and say, hey, this is probably an audit for the future, but it's not right at this moment. So let's identify it, and then we'll keep that we'll keep looking at that. When's the right time to do that? When somebody's in place and it's a little more stable and somebody can provide the information we're asking for. And so, yeah, it is a very kind of collaborative process to identify what the risks are, and then when is the right time to address them, and how to use internal audit as part of that.
Trustee Gopapur?
Thank you. Good morning, Trevor. This was, just reading the report, it looks like, almost every audit report has your findings, observations, and processes. But from your perspective, is there any top of mind issue that this committee needs to be aware of? I mean, what would be like number one on your mind if you had pointed out like the biggest was that we should be aware of?
Yeah, give me just a second here and I'll pull up the.
While Trevor is looking it up, one of the things, I think we had a conversation maybe over the summer or spring, I don't remember, with your team. Our policies and procedures have to be really brought in line. Some other universities have prioritized, put in a lot of resources, and they have gone through that. And particularly with the new CBA, we may have policies that are not consistent with that. So that's the reason you see that as one of the projects. Again, we may not have the resources to address all of them, but what are some of the key areas? For example, knowing this is coming, I've requested the leadership team to say in your areas, what are some of the 2 or 3 top things we need to focus on right away? So that's going to be a big priority for Dave and the rest of us during this year. So that's how these things evolve. There are lots of things we could be doing, but what should we be prioritizing?
Yeah. Yeah. So, so to answer your sort of question, I don't, there's nothing where, from the standpoint of there's a major hole that needs to be filled and we're very concerned about it. I don't think there is one of those. So when we look at all these risks, some of these are inherent to either the nature of universities or the nature of the item. The information technology is at the top of the list for good reason, I think, because one, it's an area of focus for the university and an area of focused in terms of academic programs and sort of thought leadership as well as anything. And so, that's a high risk because an area like a breach of cybersecurity or something that would hit the university would not just be damaging financially, but could be embarrassing as well, right? And so if you're going to have a sort of cybersecurity focus as an academic program, you certainly want to be seen as an organization that's on top of that internally as part of your own management. So that's why that one's really high risk, is just because it's very, it's obviously prevalent and it impacts the university in a variety of ways. And I think that so that's one that I think of as being kind of those multiple levels of risk where it's both strategy, reputation, and financial, and because it kind of hits all of those components, it ranks really high. The other thing that we heard consistently, the second risk on here is the budgeting process and just some of the maybe antiquated or not quite fitting tools that are being used for that, and lots of departments feeling like they need to sort of maybe do some workarounds. And anytime we hear that kind of feedback, that gives us some nervousness, in terms of needing to do things sort of outside of the system or maintain your own spreadsheets that aren't part of that as part of fund tracking of budgets and stuff. And that just leads to the potential for errors and bad decision making and things like that. Again, that can be more impactful than just an individual sort of department or project, can be impactful towards university strategy and trying to get your hands around budgets and stuff. So so those two that are at the top, I think, are some of the higher ones that I think of in terms of that I'd want the organization thinking about and making sure that those are in everything's being done, everything that's possible to be done is being done to kind of protect the university in those areas.
Okay. Are there any other questions? All right, great. Well, thank you, Trevor.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay. All right, trustees. So we're at a point now on the agenda where we were actually scheduled to take a break. It's a little after 10 o'clock, 10:05. And, we still have some important business to take care of. So we've got a couple of action items that we need to consider. And then after that, we have about 4 discussion items that are really important as well. But it is 10 o'clock, so we're a little behind, but I think I think we should probably take a break, maybe a 5-minute break, just so that we can kind of get up and stretch our legs. Okay, so it is 10:05 now. We'll take a 5-minute break and we'll come back at 10:10. So we're going to resume the meeting here. The next item on the agenda is item 4, action item. So we have 2. The first is 4.1, external audit recommendation, and that's will be presented by VP Harmon. Harmon?
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. We talked about this briefly, I think, in June during that meeting, and Vice Chair Jones and I talked a few times leading up to today's meeting, but about the fact that our current external auditor engagement is up. This was a multi-year agreement. I think it started back in 2016, not long after the OUS system dissolved. So this was probably the first independent auditor assessment of Oregon Tech that started back then. It's been a good experience. It was a multi-year contract, but we were required to do this because it's best practice, and it's required by our accreditors, and it's required by the Office of Management and Budget, who also requires a single audit. We have to have a financial audit as well. And as an independent public body. So it's something we have to have, but it's also a very helpful process. We always learn something from that. And so we went through the ordinary RFP process because it is an investment in the university. And we have respondents to that. We had a selection committee made up of faculty, staff. I don't think there was a student on this one. And they recommended that after careful consideration, they recommended the Clifton Larson Allen group, which it turns out is a group that's been doing it for a number of years. You may know Jean Bouchon and her team have done a tremendous job for it. So it's a competitive process, but at the end of the day, this is who was recommended, and so we're going to put this before committee to recommend full board approval. You're probably aware that Clifton Larson Allen is a global international financial and audit services firm, very well known in their questions about that.
Do you remember why did they select?
Yeah, there's only one other firm, and because it didn't have to be just based on price, it also was based on qualifications. And Clifton Larson Allen has developed such a distinctive knowledge of the university and their financial situations, also Oregon. They're very new in Oregon. So based on their knowledge of the state, their knowledge of higher education, competitive pricing, and the fact that they've done our single audit, which I gave the management briefing for earlier, the group selected. I wasn't on that committee, but it was.
Okay, I'm sorry, go ahead.
So I guess if there's more questions, Vice Chair Jones probably would read them.
Yeah. Okay, so for the new trustees, we have 2 auditors. We have an internal auditor, that was Kernet Stokes, and they just reported on their function. And we have an external auditor, and this Clifton Larson is currently our external auditor. So now it's time for us to renew their contract because the external auditor, Clifton Larson's contract, when does it expire?
With the current year audit that they're working on right now, they're already doing significant work with Michelle and her team, and that they'll be presenting at the January board meeting the year-end audit.
Okay, so would that be considered their last?
That's the last one.
The last one for their contract?
Right.
And so you have here the new term of their contract would begin in February. Okay, so this is an action item. And this is an action item in that the Finance and Facilities Committee will review and consider and then make a recommendation to the full board for adoption of accepting Clifton Larson as our external auditor for The term is, how long is the term?
It'll be a 5-year term with the option of 2 additional renewals to 1-year renewals.
Okay. So staff has made a recommendation. Let me, I'd like to read that recommendation. And then I will ask for a motion and a second. And then we'll have a vote of this committee for moving on with this item. So let me read the staff recommendation. So this says, staff requests a motion to recommend that the full board authorize staff to negotiate and execute a multi-year agreement with Clifton Larson Allen LLP to provide professional audit services to Oregon Tech for a term to begin on or about February 1, 2023 and extend to January 31, 2028 with an option for 2 additional 1-year periods thereafter. So do I have a motion?
Give the motion.
Thank you, Trustee Starr. Do I have a second?
A second.
Thank you, Trustee Vitale. So we have a motion by Trustee Starr and a second by Trustee Vitale. What we'll do now is I'd like to have a roll call vote. So Dave, please.
Trustee Gopal-Per.
Aye.
Trustee Starr.
Aye.
Trustee Vitale.
Aye.
Trustee Jones.
Aye.
Trustee Wishman.
Aye.
Your motion passes.
Okay, great. So that motion passes unanimously. I think just to make a note that that was done. So thank you, trustees. That motion passes. So with that, we will move on to the next action item. And that's a recommendation for approval of the summer term 2023 for the Doctor of Physical Therapy tuition and fees. Just VP Army.
Vice Jones. It's unusual that we come to the board this far through the year for approval of tuition and fees. We normally do that in the spring of the year preceding when they're effective. But at the time that we worked through that process last March and April, we approved the fees in April, we did not know as a management team that the DPT or the Doctor of Physical Therapy program may actually have students beginning as early as next summer. So the board at that time approved tuition and fees through the rest of the year through August. And because this wasn't included, we have to include this for the board to approve that just for the summer term of 23. So basically, you know, the power for the board to do this comes from Oregon Revised Statute 352.102. In response to that, several years ago, of course, after the OUS dissolution, the board adopted a policy that reflects basically what's required in the Oregon statute. And the Doctor of Physical Therapy program is our first doctoral program on campus, so we're very excited about that. Dr. Mark Campolo is the program director, and he and Dean Peterson have been working very hard through the process to get that accredited, and of course, Provost Mott leading that initiative. And the fees, as they looked into this, they want this to be a competitive program. Obviously, it's first-year program, so you want to be competitive. You want to reflect the value of the program, but you also want to make it affordable for students. So they basically looked at the region, but also within the state where similar programs are offered, and that's how they went about selecting the tuition. So it's basically about what it is in other schools and a little bit cheaper. And the way they approach this, you know, I come from university before I came here, that was a graduate university. So all the programs were doctoral programs pretty much, of course we have master's programs too, but it's not unusual to have block tuition, which is basically what this is, which is where professional and doctoral programs, you'll charge an amount per term or an amount per year and divide it over the terms as opposed to charging by student credit hour or credit hour earned. And part of that's because they're cohort programs where everybody goes through in the same group. If you don't advance to the next stage, sometimes you may not get to finish your degree. So this was structured in a similar way as the way the other university in the state has structured theirs. So it's very consistent. It also makes it easy for the student to understand what their education will be because it's the same term to term, so it doesn't fluctuate within the same academic year. So that's basically the background behind that. Any questions on how that was rocked? So this is where they arrived at the tuition. This is very similar if you converted it to their general graduate fee. It's very similar to that, but again, it's stated as a fixed amount. So the resident for summer would pay $69.42, the non-resident would pay $11,654. And then the board had already approved these particular mandatory fees, the building fee for Klamath Falls campus, the incidental fee, the health services fee, and then the student rec center fee. But we put it on this measure just to reassert that this also applies to the doctoral program. Sometimes some of these fees might be prorated depending on the availability of services, like the health services fee may be reduced if there are limited hours of availability. So this will be what you're voting on.
So John, I'm sorry, can we go back? So the mandatory fees are in addition to the regular fees that you have up top. So you need to add the two of those together, right?
Right. Well, yes, and this was adopted a number of years ago to help pay for building maintenance, and it really hasn't changed for a number of years. This one is, the incidental fee that goes to pay for a lot of things that are packaged together the students need, the health services fee, the student health clinic, and then the rec center fee, which really goes to pay the bond retirement debt, because that was funded by student fees that they voted on in advance of actually getting that debt. They felt like it was a good enough investment, so that hasn't changed either. But you're right, you would add it together.
So it's about $700 more. You
Right.
add $700.
Well, we always itemize it, for transparency, but you're right.
Okay, Trustee McGeehan?
Thank you. Interested to find out, so we are looking at offering this at Klamath. Any interest or of offering it in Wilsonville in the future?
It's in early days.
This will be the very first cohort. And there are many steps you have to go through. Dr. Peterson and Dr. Mott can provide more information. Even if there is an interest, we have to go through a process. We cannot suddenly offer the program in the campus. We need to go through accreditation blessings in order to do that. The site has to be, it's not just a program at the university. The site also comes into picture when it comes to accreditation.
Okay.
Even if we have an accredited program, we need to get special permission to offer it in a different site within the same university. So right now, this is the first cohort, and we are very pleased to have a lot of interest. I think it is, you are talking about it later today, the interest number of applications for DPT.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's a healthy thing. And we have finished all the university steps. We just one last decision is pending from the next accreditation agency. And the only other public university that has this is Oregon State. And then that's why they had to look at the tuition, how is it within the other public universities. The privates, I believe both George Fox and Pacific, perhaps, both of them have DPT. I'm not sure of Pacific. George Fox definitely does. So we needed to look at the market. So to offer it in Portland Metro, first of all, for the health, you need to have all the facilities. So that is another challenge. So we need to be very mindful of what does it take to create such a program. In health programs, you need to build a field of dreams before you can announce anything. So that becomes very expensive.
So is there a minimum cohort that we need for this?
You guys want to answer?
So the anticipated cohort size of the first group summer will be, that's our standard cohort for each of the next 3 years. So, start with students, that's our hope. That's 3 years rather than 5.
Dan is the expert, but I will say we need to declare a cohort that's very unique again in health. In a DPT, I believe you have 3 rotations. Therefore, before we can even ask for accreditation, we need to identify 72 clinical sites where our students will do the externship rotations. So in health, you need to declare what cohort you want. Look at the number of clinical externship or clinical rotations you call it.
And there's a certain number, you have to have a certain percentage above what you actually enroll in order to make sure that there are always locations for your students.
So we cannot just, even though we have the good news is there's a lot of genuine student interest and completed the applications. I don't want to.
Well, the 24.
Yes. So, but then we need to be mindful of clinical sites. And one of the unique things about this program, it is joint with OHSU. So the degree is going to be granted jointly by OHSU and Oregon Tech. And the seals of both institutions will be on the diploma. That's will be the signatures of the president.
Yeah, second question. So what are the unique variable expenses for this program? So I'm trying to figure out if it pencils. So if we charge $7,000, what per term, and we have 24 students, what does it cost the university to actually have the program? So what's uniquely, so we don't have to pay for the building because the buildings are fixed, but do we have professors that are unique to this? Do we have, what kind of expenses do we have that we have to take on because we have this program?
We have 3 faculty now. We are anticipating hiring 2 more, and that should then be able to cover classes. We'll have a lease at Sky Lakes for the research space that's required for the faculty in DPT are expected to be research active. So we're working with Sky Lakes on some space there.
But those, for the most part, it's not your. These are not, this program is not one you can build like live. I mean, it is already ready to go before the students get there. So cost of equipment should be other than updates and supplies that education experience. Large costs.
So I think getting to the heart of Trustee Starr's question, his original question is, how many students do we need in order to make this program sustainable and essentially pay for itself? So you mentioned 24 students to begin with. Is that going to be enough to make this program sustainable so that it's at least break even? And is that the plan for now? And then you mentioned, you know, the increase in students over time. Does that all fit in with making this program sustainable?
We start the answer and then they can add in. One of the things we did, knowing the expensive nature of this program, initially, I believe, Dan, correct me if I'm wrong, you came up with a 5-year plan in terms of the business plan for this project. We, I think you may be looking at if we are charging commensurate with the other graduate program, is this something affordable? First of all, we need to look at the market. In the case of DPT, we need to look at the clinical sites, which is a challenge, particularly when you're sitting in rural Oregon, assuring enough such clinical locations. But we have been proactive and fortunate are in 2 places. Dan and others worked on our work actively with donors. We have been able to attract investments to help us get the initial set of equipment, so it doesn't have to be purchased from these funds only. Secondly, we were also fortunate to be able to get some special funding from the state out of the 5.5 million John talked about. That is helping. This is part of the rural health expansion initiative. So we did a multi-year plan, anticipated what could be the expenses wherever possible, brought in donor funds and special funds. So we are able to start the program, which is competitive in the marketplace. For example, our charges are very close to Oregon State's. And if you, as another public university, cost way more than what another university, this may never get off the ground. So we want to make sure we build up a reputation in this area. So it has a startup plan, and then it has a 5-year plan, looking at what the cash flow.
Well, I would just be curious to see what the S curve looks like as far as investment to where we break even to where we think we're actually.
Just don't have it
Okay.
in front of us, so we can get that to you. But it's built out for 5 years with the hires of faculty at certain times.
You know, and 24 students will not make the program break even.
Yeah.
The build up the students over time, over the first 3 to 5 years, you should eventually, yes, make the program break even. And it should be, plan is that it will then be greater than what. But I think that's the key, right? Is we need to build this. It's got to have enrollment. We have to have students join us. 24 students matters a lot in terms of getting the place that you're. But in terms of what the performance says, I don't have it right here in front of me to tell you what the year is, but I believe it was somewhere around the year that we were supposed to start breaking even. So we have the 72, 75, 75 students in there.
Yeah, I hate to focus, but I just think it's so important with the, you know, I mean, we spent all this time talking about 45% of our are funded by the state, and so anything that we add, we need to make sure it doesn't harm us.
We don't want to dig a deeper hole.
Yeah. So, no, I think it's a legitimate question. I think, Dr. Houston, you've sort of laid out and provided a really reasonable explanation that maybe the first couple of years, the program, as it grows, it will get better, and we will continue to work on making it better. But this is a 5-year plan that we have laid out so that eventually the program does pay for itself. But this is an initial investment for us to have a doctor of physical therapy program, which is, I'm really excited about this program. And so putting this into play, but again, understanding the financial sort of risks and obligations is something that we'll have to watch, as the president will have to watch, and the board will have to watch as well. But it sounds like we have a good plan in place.
If I may, sure. The intention of this particular program is not to just put a doctoral program at Oregon Tech, also give a benefit to the institution beyond even our rural care and rural focus. And it's supposed to have a financial benefit, not to be necessarily breaking. So I mean, that's how it was designed, and that's why it's important for us to get that enrollment in there. Sure.
Thank you, Dr. Peterson. Chair Davis?
I have a compound question. The first is, we talked about summer term. So is this a year-round program with tuition being charged all year to the student? Which that's important because in terms of cash flow, as John and Dr. Nagy would probably say, that means we won't see a dip mid-year in these students. This will be a constant stream of tuition. Is that right?
That's right. And even, once we get all 3 years cohorts in there, it would generate about $2 million a year if we're all in-state students, which we know that we're out-of-state students. So that's just intuition alone.
Right. And then maybe just for the benefit of, I wasn't on the board when the recommendation for this program was adopted, and there's new trustees, but could you put in context, Dr. Nagy and any others, sort of why this is an important program?
Well, first of all, when I came in 2017, by the time the community has been talking about it for almost 8 to 10 years, wanting it out physical therapy. I'm not into fishing, but when I came, I said that you have to fish or you have to cut bait. We can't keep talking about this. So thanks to the fine work of many, we were able to get it going, and we got it approved. Certainly, it's very important to the community. And when we presented it to HEC and other places, the resonance was very obvious. Actually, some of the private universities even tried to. They were a bit concerned of the competition. Sure. And Dan talked about also the institutional profile. And one of the important things the board did in 2018 as part of the new strategic planning process is to revise our mission statement. Our mission statement, my memory serves me correctly, did not even refer to graduate programs. So Oregon Tech as a university, our own identity is so important, competitive. Particularly with what the legislature has done, giving approvals to community colleges to have baccalaureates. Oregon is becoming the states in the department now it is here. I think this also helps the institutional identity as a university that offers graduate programs. It's not vanity. There was a clear legitimate need. Sky Lakes was very interested. And the fact we got into an agreement with Sky Lakes and OHSU. So it is a 3-way partnership that is resulting in this.
Are we sharing tuition with OHSU or what's that?
No,
What does
we
it mean
share-
to be in partnership with them?
Well, we have our faculty, they are involved in the process in terms of accreditation, they were involved actively. We are paying some of the faculty to provide faculty support right now, right?
We are looking at that model right now. That was the original plan, there's issues about travel.
Sure.
So we may just move forward the plan to get our own faculty a little bit more quickly.
In health programs, as I said, you need to have all the elements in place before you can offer. So in terms of being able to, in terms of being able to have the right kind of faculty resources and expertise, this way we don't have to hire a lot of people at the same time.
I just have one more thing in terms of income. So I'm pretty sure it's after 2 years, you're breaking the year cohort. So you're always going to have 3 years students. The other thing is that those faculty, particularly the one we just hired and the next 2, which will be the full group, are going to be required to be doing research. It's part of the DPT program. We already have the one we hired this year is bringing, and I think it's an NIH grant from her current institution. So she's already coming in, bringing money. So that's going to be an additional piece of income that we'll be getting.
So I think it's, I think something that you said, Dr. Nagy, is really important. When you first became president of the university, this was a discussion that had been going on for the previous 8 years and trying to figure out how we can do this. And so starting from that point, it sounds like you really encouraged the team to really pursue this, like you say, fish or cut bait. And so this is a program, an idea that has been growing over the last 5 years, and now we're here, ready to implement this program. Like I said, I just think it's a great thing.
One other thing I would point out, and I agree with everything that's been said in the financial model, it's really important for us to realize, our mission goes just beyond educating the people. It's the community benefit too that's going to happen from this, because, physical therapy is really becoming so popular in controlling what has been, the abuse of medications and things for pain relief. So primary care physicians are really engaging physical therapy as a mode of care to really help avoid, what has been problems with drug abuse across many of our communities. So this will be very important for that.
Thank you, John. Okay, are there any other questions? All right.
Would we expect fall and spring and summer to be about the same? As far as 69?
It's a very good question. Yes, for this program. But then we have said the new rates will reflect any board approved increases in the following years.
Okay.
So that's something that this board has to look at further down in terms of when do we change, if we do the cycle of tuition changes. Because couple of universities in Oregon have started adjusting those rates effective summer rather than in the fall. So we need to look at some of those things in Oregon, because the Oregon fiscal year runs starting summer term. So there are some nuances to work through. But any changes we make to the tuition structures in the fall will also be reflected in corresponding adjustments.
Or do we, if establishing the cohort so important, do we guarantee that throughout their 3 years or something? I don't,
No, we don't. This is cohort tuition by year, not for the 3 years. We are not guaranteeing the same tuition every year. Correct me, John, am I saying?
You're correct. It's only for summer, and then as we go through our tuition.
I was saying as a something to appeal if we need to get the 24, that we need some marketing thing or whatever to be able to say that tuition is stable for your. I don't know.
I know all good points. We need to even look at it broader. This is the first cohort. It's one of those things. We want to make sure we have the capacity to attract applications based on what I know. We are demonstrating that capability to attract applications, complete applications. So I'm very optimistic on how it will start.
Okay.
Good point.
Very good question. So thank you, Trustee Stark. So let me read the motion, and then again, I will ask Let me read the recommendation. I'll ask for a motion in a second. So this says the staff is recommending a motion by the Finance and Facilities Committee as follows. Motion to recommend that the full board set the summer term 2023 tuition and fees for the Doctor of Physical Therapy program in accordance with the President's recommendation memo, and authorize the President or their designee as available under policy and law to make minor and technical adjustments to these proposed rates as necessary to correct mathematical rounding errors, inconsistencies, or omissions, and execute the board's directives. Is there a motion? Okay, so the motion has to be given by a member of the Finance and Facilities Committee.
A couple.
But thank you. So Trustee Starr makes the motion. Is there a second?
Yeah.
Trustee Vitale has made the second. So we have a motion. We have a second. Dave, can we have a roll call vote, please?
Certainly. Trustee Gopalpur.
Aye.
Trustee Starr.
Aye.
Trustee Vitale.
Aye.
Trustee Wishman.
Aye.
Chair Jones.
Aye.
Passes unanimously.
Okay, so that item is approved. Again, very exciting. Thank you, VP Harmon.
Vice Chair Johnson, I know we're short on time, so I'll go through these very quickly. It's just to wrap up.
Please, thank you.
With great expediency. The facilities master plan, which we mentioned a few times, we had intended to get done last year. We just kind of ran out of time. So it's on the agenda for this year. We've already selected the architect to work with, that's Soderstrom. They actually did our original facilities plan in 2006. We did have some work done by Demolish Air in 2017, which has helped drive some of our recent decision making about locations of buildings and selecting buildings for renewal, replacement, repair. We, of course, went through the RFP project, and the scope and timeline of the work is already kind of been outlined. So primarily, they will advise us on land use, which is really important because, we have 303 acres, but only about 100 acres is intensively utilized. So it'll help us understand how can we make the most of the remainder of the campus footprint. Also, they'll do a thorough assessment and condition analysis of all our facilities and our equipment. That will be really important because that helps us report to the HEC on what our facilities are, what the age of facilities are, the types of repairs and things. And it also helps us prioritize how we spend our renewal and improvement dollars from the HEC. And then the building space use. Every time we submit a capital project to the HEC for consideration by the legislature, we always have to figure out how can we better utilize this space. And of course, space utilization has evolved a lot over the years as the adoption of technology and other forms of electronic medium have evolved. So that will help us much better understand where we can place cohorts of classes or like classes and make sure that we maximize the square footage and logistics of those buildings. It'll also help us understand our campus identity. For some time we've talked about how there's no grand entrance or sort of, standout entrance to the campus, and we want to think about how that would look over time. A lot of these things will take a number of years to actually develop, but it'll help give us a roadmap of how to get there and to also understand how we can pace ourselves financially and otherwise to build a more appealing campus and to make sure we take care of the great assets that we have there. Also parking and transportation around campus, as buildings have been added or renovated, we've enhanced the parking. Some of the traffic flows right now are kind of disjointed because of the street work that's happening over at the hospital, but this will help us better understand how to route our traffic on campus, looking at our other infrastructure, and also security. So we should get great value out of this, and we think it'll probably be done by next August. That's the target date. It could be a little sooner. It'll be a very collaborative project. Again, in the spirit of shared governance, we'll have a very strong engagement by the Facilities Advisory Commission, and we'll also have some additional folks added to that group so that we be sure we get lots of input, because those are the people who live and work on campus. They can provide a lot of very valuable input to the consultants in this process. And we'll get periodic updates to the board as that goes forward. The campus geothermal infrastructure is a really critical project for us. We have had consistent, first of all, this infrastructure is about 60 years old. It's a series of source wells with geothermal and fresh, cold water as well. a series of injection wells, and then this whole network of pipes that are in tunnels, heat exchangers in buildings. And so it went down as recently as this past week. I remember Provost Mott said in office it's about 63 degrees. What's going on? Well, the geothermal system had gone down again. We've spent about $2.2 million in repairs on the system in the last 18 to 24 months. And it's been a really efficient, reliable system over the last 60 years, but it's just getting to the point where it really needs a major renovation and placement of components and parts, or we could be at risk for the institution having to actually close for some catastrophic failure that, you know, in the middle of the winter when it's cold and snows on the ground and we have no heat, we have no hot water. We've talked with our friends at the HEC about how we could go about receiving some emergency funding, because we think this certainly qualifies, understanding the types of projects that have been submitted in the past by other higher education institutions. This one really is an emergent thing for us. It's imminent, but we don't know when, and we don't know to what extent, but it's just these constant interruptions, and we had to actually close up for a week back earlier in the summer. So we're not situated to take over with electric heat and things of that nature. When geothermal goes down, we're just down. So it is a very urgent situation. We had an engineering analysis done by Fluent Technologies and engineers. They said they thought the repairs would be about $15 million in today's dollars, but realizing this would be something that would take 2 to 3 years, a good portion of it would have to be done in the summer when we have less people on campus, less students. It would probably be more like $17 million in actually future dollars over the next 3 years. So we think we've got some traction. We think people understand. We're continuing to assert the message to make sure we get that to the right people, because if it goes forward from the HEC, the Higher Education Coordinating Commission, then it would be sent to essentially the governor that would then submit to the legislature. So we're hoping that we can make the case, and actually was a legislator on campus back in the summer that we talked to about this very issue, that was very interested in helping us support this and try to get some traction to get this funded. There's no way, you know, the improvement dollars from the HEC, as much as we appreciate them, will ever really allow us to do this type of repair in the time and the phases that it would take to do it. So, and then Dr. Mott had mentioned the space over at the Sky Lakes Medical Center, where earmarked about 700 square feet. We haven't got the rental price squared away yet, but we are working with our colleagues there to finalize the architectural drawings and to get that done. So hopefully we can get that completed by May before classes begin. Short timeline, but we think we can. And also the general fund loan. This is something I thought last year, Jones thought this was a good idea. He said, let's disclose this to the board. Doesn't require board approval, but just something the board needs to know. So, you know, auxiliaries are supposed to fund themselves, but as we mentioned before, VP Foley doesn't have a lot of reserves because she's trying to keep the cost of students at a minimal amount, but at the same time have some reserve. Well, there was a huge project that emerged in the college union that I don't think any of us expected would be this expensive. Started out, we continued to have issues with the wastewater leaving the building. There have been a lot of those normal kind of things where you run the auger and you do all the kind of things you normally do, but that was not working anymore, and things were backing up in the kitchen and really could have been a health risk. So we had a complete assessment of the issue, and we had an initial estimate of about $167,000 to repair it. We weren't sure if they'd have to go into the concrete floor because remember it's on a slab, and but it's a multi-story building, so we knew it would be really expensive. As they got into it, what we found out was there were several issues. One is the exit waste pipe was essentially bowed in the center, so things were never really exiting the building. They were just gathering in the center of that pipe, so no wonder we couldn't figure out why things kept stopping up. And as a consequence of that, it had rusted that galvanized steel, where then, you know, it was open basically to the elements under the ground as well. So it was a major problem. The other thing, though, that really caused a lot of the escalation of costs was when they went to break through the concrete floor, they realized the pipes weren't where they were in the schematics of the drawings from the construction, 30, 40 years ago. So they had to find where are those pipes? And of course, you know, they have technology where they can track them. So they did minimize the cost, but at the end of the day, we're going to be at about $800,000 in one of our most heavily utilized buildings on campus, where all of our student activities and membership programs and things are. So it wasn't an option. But what we'd like to do, and I don't have the details today because we're not through with this yet, and Michelle Myers is going to be looking at this, is we'd like to get a loan from the general fund to auxiliaries to pay back over a period of probably 5 to 10 years. But we also think a good portion of this will qualify for a general fund expenditure because it was outside the building essentially. So if you say the building envelope itself is what you have to spend auxiliary funds on, then those things leading up underneath the building to get to the building probably will qualify, but we have to look at our bond covenants and we have to make sure, under the IRS guidelines and things that we're spending those dollars correctly. So I'll come back to the board with a follow-up on that as of January. Just want to let you know.
Thank you, John. So ultimately, this will be, this will come back to the Finance and Facilities Committee with a little more detail, and it's probably something that we will have to act on. Yes.
How has it been funded so far?
Well, everything's kind of fungible in a way.
Sure.
It's been funded through the reserve of, it'll just clean them out. I mean, that'll be every day and a half basically, so. Yeah.
It came to the point, it has to be handled. They kept getting one surprise after another. Even in the direction of the pipe or the flow, you had some issues. Apparently, those architectural renderings were suggested features.
Hey, John, just maybe for future meeting, so on the geothermal, so if you guys ever figured out what it costs to heat Oregon Tech with natural gas?
Not done that. That's
No, what I'm curious about is I'm sure it'd be millions a year. And if you think about this added benefit of having this geothermal and just some level of continued investment we need to have in that thing, because I mean, that and the tons of emissions that we don't have because of, burning or pulling energy that's coal fired or whatever, that I mean, it's an amazing advantage to have, and I think we just need a way to say this
we
is what
say
we
a
avoid.
little over a million. I think it's about $1.4 million a year of conventional utilities. The problem is we've never really been able to set that up as like a sinking fund where you set it off to the side and say, okay, I think it's great, we'll repair it, because we've never really had that margin, to do it with. But when it works well and it is efficient, it's renewable, and that's, we're all about renewability resources, but I think that's
I mean, it's an amazing system to have.
Yeah, it's our most valuable natural resource.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, John. All right, so here, let me get to the agenda because we're just about done. Okay, so the next item on the agenda is item 6. That's other business or new business. Is there any new business or other business that the trustees would like to discuss? Okay, so that brings us to the end of our agenda. So if there are no other questions, comments, the time is 10:57. Thank you, trustees, and I will call this meeting adjourned.